I deleted Google Search from my phone's home screen 3 months ago, and honestly, I have not missed it once. Not once. And before you assume this is some dramatic clickbait exaggeration, stick with me for the next few minutes, because what I am about to walk you through is not just my personal opinion, it is backed by exactly what is happening across the entire internet right now. And once you see the numbers, you will understand why I'm not the only one making this switch. For over 2 decades, typing something into Google was not even a decision. It was a reflex, an automatic habit baked so deeply into daily life that most of us never once stopped to question it. You had a question, you opened a tab, you typed it in, and you scrolled through a page of blue links until you found what you needed. That habit was so deeply built into how we all used the internet that most people never even considered there might be a better way. I certainly did not. Google was not just a search engine to me, it was basically synonymous with the entire concept of looking something up online. But somewhere over the last year, that relationship quietly started to break down, and I do not think I am imagining it. Here's where things start to get interesting, because this is not just one person's frustration. This is an actual measurable shift happening across the entire search industry in 2026. Google still holds the overwhelming majority of search traffic worldwide, and it is important to be honest about that up front, because anyone telling you Google is collapsing overnight is exaggerating. But that market share, the number that Google has proudly defended for over 2 decades, has actually started slipping in ways it never used to. Multiple independent tracking firms have reported that Google's share of the search market has been drifting downward, and privacy-focused alternatives have recorded genuine spikes in usage, with one competitor recording an all-time high in installs shortly after Google's most recent major product event. That timing is not a coincidence, and once you understand why, this entire story starts making a lot more sense. Earlier this year, Google unveiled what it called the biggest redesign to search in 25 years, placing artificial intelligence directly at the center of the experience instead of treating it as an optional add-on. Instead of a simple list of links, Google now leads many searches with an AI-generated summary, sometimes even a full conversational chat box sitting right at the top of the results page. On paper, that sounds like an upgrade. In practice, for a lot of us, it started feeling like something else entirely. And that is exactly the moment my own relationship with Google Search started to sour. Let me walk you through exactly what started bothering me, because I think if you use Google regularly, you have probably felt at least one of these same frustrations, even if you never quite put your finger on why. The first thing was accuracy, or rather the lack of it. Those AI-generated summaries that now sit above almost every search result are wrong, often enough that I stopped trusting them by default. And here is the frustrating part. When an AI summary confidently states something incorrect, most people do not immediately question it, because it is presented with the exact same tone of authority as a correct answer. I found myself having to scroll past the AI summary and manually verify information anyway, which completely defeats the entire purpose of getting a quick answer in the first place. The second thing that started grinding on me was how genuinely difficult it became to find what I was actually looking for. I do not think this is just nostalgia talking either. Search quality has been a subject of real, documented frustration for a while now, with plenty of longtime users openly admitting that they regularly have to dig to the third page of results, or further, just to find something genuinely useful, buried underneath layers of advertisements, sponsored content, and search engine optimized filler articles that say very little while stretching out for thousands of words just to rank higher in the algorithm. If you have ever searched for a simple recipe and had to scroll through 3 paragraphs of someone's personal life story before finding the actual ingredients, you already know exactly the frustration I am describing. The third thing, and this one honestly bothers me the most, is how much of the modern Google search experience feels less like searching and more like being managed. Every click gets tracked, every query gets logged, every ad you see is precisely targeted based on a profile of you that has been built up over years of searches, emails, location data, and browsing habits, most of which you never explicitly agreed to in any meaningful sense. I'm not saying this to sound paranoid, I am saying it because once you start paying attention to how personalized and ad-saturated the modern search experience has become, it becomes genuinely hard to unsee. So here is what I actually did instead. And I want to walk you through this honestly, including the parts that were not perfectly smooth, because I do not think it is fair to pretend switching search engines is some magical instant upgrade with zero adjustment period. I started experimenting with a handful of alternatives, testing them against my actual daily habits instead of just reading reviews online, because the only way to really know if something works for you is to actually use it for real tasks, not just skim a comparison article written by someone trying to sell you a product. The first alternative I tried seriously was a privacy-focused search engine that does not track you, does not build an advertising profile on you, and does not personalize results based on your search history the way Google does. The immediate difference was noticeable within the first few days. Search results felt cleaner, less cluttered with sponsored content, and genuinely less manipulative in how information was presented to me. I was not being nudged toward a particular answer because an algorithm had decided that answer would keep me engaged longer or click on more ads. I was simply getting relevant results based on my actual query, which honestly felt almost refreshing after years of not realizing how much I had been unconsciously adapting to Google's particular style of search. The second category of alternatives I tried, and this is honestly the one that changed my daily habits the most, were AI native answer engines, tools that are built from the ground up to synthesize information from across the web into a direct, cited response, instead of handing you a page of links and leaving you to do all the work yourself. The difference here is subtle but genuinely important, and it is worth explaining clearly because I think a lot of people conflate this with Google's own AI overview feature, when in reality they work quite differently under the hood. These dedicated answer engines tend to show their sources transparently, letting you click through and verify exactly where each piece of information came from, rather than presenting a single blended paragraph with no clear attribution. That transparency matters enormously to me, and I suspect it matters to you too, even if you have not consciously thought about it that way before. When I ask a question and get an answer, I want to know where that answer came from, so I can judge for myself whether the source is credible, current, and actually relevant to what I'm asking. Google's AI overview often blends information from multiple sources into a single confident-sounding paragraph without making it easy to trace exactly where each claim originated, which makes it much harder to fact-check on the fly. And honestly, that lack of transparency is a big part of why I stopped trusting it as a default first stop for anything remotely important. Now let's talk about speed, because this is the part that genuinely surprised me the most once I made the switch. I expected alternatives to feel slower, clunkier, somehow less refined than Google, simply because Google has had over 2 decades and effectively unlimited resources to perfect its search experience. That assumption turned out to be mostly wrong. For a huge number of everyday questions, the AI native tools I switched to were actually faster at giving me a usable answer because they skipped the step of making me open multiple tabs, skim several articles, and mentally synthesize the information myself. Instead, they do that synthesis for me up front, and then let me dig deeper into sources only if I actually need to. Let me get specific about the actual tools involved here, because I think vague references to alternatives are not that useful if you are actually trying to make a decision for yourself. On the privacy-focused side of things, there are search engines built specifically around the promise of not tracking you and not building an advertising profile based on your search history, and several of them have seen genuinely significant spikes in downloads and daily usage over the past few months, coinciding almost exactly with growing frustration around Google's AI-driven redesign. On the AI native side, there's a whole new category of answer engines that have emerged specifically to synthesize real-time information from across the web into direct, cited responses, and a handful of general-purpose AI assistants have also added dedicated search capabilities that let them pull in live current information rather than relying purely on whatever they learned during training. What I noticed testing these tools side by side was that each one has developed its own particular personality, for lack of a better word, even though they are technically solving the same basic problem of helping you find information. Some lean heavily into speed and brevity, giving you the shortest possible direct answer and getting out of your way. Others lean into depth, showing their reasoning and pulling from a wider range of sources before presenting a more thorough, nuanced response. Neither approach is objectively better. It genuinely depends on what you are trying to accomplish in that specific moment, which is honestly part of why I ended up using a mix of different tools rather than settling on just one single replacement for Google. Let me walk you through a few specific, real examples from my own daily life over the past few months, because I think abstract descriptions only go so far before they start to feel vague and unconvincing. When I was planning a trip a few weeks ago, instead of opening a dozen browser tabs comparing flight options, hotel reviews, and neighborhood recommendations, I asked an AI native tool a single detailed question about what I was looking for, and it gave me a synthesized comparison pulling from multiple travel sites, complete with sources I could click through to verify pricing and availability myself. That single interaction would have easily taken me 20 or 30 minutes of manual tab switching and cross-referencing using traditional search, and instead it took less than 2 minutes. Shopping research has been another area where the difference felt genuinely dramatic. Instead of scrolling through pages of sponsored product listings mixed in with genuine organic results, many of which are increasingly difficult to distinguish from each other at a glance, I started asking AI tools directly for honest comparisons between specific products based on my actual stated priorities, whether that was price, durability, or a specific feature I cared about. The responses felt noticeably less influenced by which company had paid the most for prominent ad placement, and more genuinely aligned with what I had actually asked for, which is exactly the kind of experience that traditional search increasingly struggles to deliver once advertising dollars get involved in shaping what you see first. Even something as simple as troubleshooting a technical problem on my computer changed dramatically. Where I used to search for an error message, click through several outdated forum threads, and piece together a solution myself from fragments of unrelated advice, I now describe the exact problem to an AI tool and get a direct, step-by-step solution tailored to my specific situation, often with the ability to ask immediate follow-up questions if the first suggestion does not fully solve the issue. That kind of back-and-forth conversation simply was not possible with traditional search, no matter how well-crafted your original query happened to be, and it represents a genuinely different way of interacting with information, rather than just a faster version of the same old process. If you're finding this breakdown genuinely useful so far, go ahead and tap that like button right now because it genuinely helps this video reach more people who are dealing with the exact same search frustrations that we're talking about today. Let's get into the actual data now because I do not want this video to just be one person's anecdotal experience dressed up as a trend. There is real research backing up what a lot of us have started noticing individually. Industry analysts have projected that artificial intelligence assistants could end up handling a meaningful chunk of all online search queries by the end of this year, representing one of the most significant shifts in how people find information since search engines first became mainstream in the late 1990s. Separate research has shown that a majority of people already reach for AI tools instead of traditional search engines, specifically when they are looking for products or services to buy, which tells you this shift is not confined to tech enthusiasts or early adopters. It is spreading into completely mainstream, everyday use cases. Even more telling, some of the platforms most directly dependent on search traffic have already reported real, measurable declines in visitors, coinciding almost exactly with the rise of conversational AI tools, because people are increasingly getting their answers directly from an AI assistant, instead of clicking through to the original website at all. That is a genuinely massive shift, not just in how individual people search, but in how the entire economics of the internet function. Because so much of the web has been built around the assumption that people click through search results to visit actual websites, generating ad revenue and traffic in the process. This is where I want to be completely honest with you about the trade-offs involved, because I do not think it is fair or accurate to present this switch as some kind of flawless upgrade with no downsides whatsoever. There are real costs to moving away from traditional search. You deserve to hear them clearly instead of just the highlight reel. The biggest one, in my experience, has been depth. For genuinely complex research tasks where I need to compare dozens of sources, dig into obscure forums, or find highly specific, niche information that only exists on a handful of small websites, traditional search still occasionally has an edge simply because of the sheer scale and breadth of what Google has indexed over more than 2 decades of crawling the internet. The second honest trade-off is that AI native answer engines can occasionally get things wrong too. Just like Google's AI overview can, no AI system currently available is perfectly accurate 100% of the time. And treating any of these tools, including the ones I personally switched to, as an infallible oracle would be genuinely irresponsible advice for me to give you. The difference, at least in my experience, is less about total accuracy and more about transparency and trust. When I can see exactly which sources an answer is drawn from, I can judge for myself how much to trust it. When an answer is presented as a single confident paragraph with no clear sourcing, I have no easy way to evaluate its reliability at all. And that difference in transparency has genuinely changed how much I trust the tools I use every single day. Let's talk about the people on the other side of this equation for a moment, because I think it is easy to only think about search from the perspective of the person typing in the query, while completely ignoring the millions of writers, journalists, small business owners, and content creators whose livelihoods have depended for years on Google sending them traffic. If more and more people get their answers directly from an AI summary without ever clicking through to the original source, that represents a genuine existential threat to a huge portion of the internet economy that has been built around exactly that click-through model for the past 2 decades. Independent bloggers, local news outlets, and small niche websites are often hit hardest by this shift because they typically do not have the brand recognition or marketing budget to drive traffic through channels other than organic search in the first place. I bring this up not to guilt you out of trying these tools, because I genuinely do think the individual user experience has improved for a lot of everyday tasks. I bring it up because I think it is worth holding two slightly uncomfortable truths at the same time. The tools genuinely are better for a lot of what most of us actually search for on a daily basis. And the broader economic model that has funded huge portions of the useful internet for the past 20 years is being genuinely disrupted by that same shift, sometimes in ways that could eventually reduce the overall quality and quantity of original content available for these AI tools to draw from in the first place. It is a strange kind of feedback loop when you really sit and think about it, because if fewer websites can afford to keep producing original research and reporting, the AI tools synthesizing answers from across the web eventually have less genuinely new, high-quality material to draw from. Some of the platforms building these AI native tools are aware of this tension and have started experimenting with ways to compensate original content creators, or at least drive some meaningful referral traffic back to sources. But honestly, it is still early, and nobody has landed on a model that clearly and fairly solves this problem yet. This is genuinely one of the more important unresolved questions hanging over this entire shift. And I do not think it gets nearly enough attention compared to how much people talk about which specific tool gives the fastest or most accurate answer on any given day. There's also a slightly less obvious economic angle worth mentioning here, because it affects businesses just as much as individual content creators. Companies that have spent years and significant marketing budgets optimizing their websites to rank highly in traditional Google search results are now having to figure out an entirely new game, sometimes described as optimizing for visibility inside AI-generated answers, rather than just chasing a high-ranking blue link position. That is a genuinely different skill set, focused more on being cited as a credible source within an AI response rather than simply accumulating the right combination of keywords and backlinks that used to work under the old search ranking system. Businesses that fail to adapt to this new reality risk becoming essentially invisible to a fast-growing segment of customers who increasingly ask an AI assistant for recommendations instead of typing a query into a traditional search bar and scrolling through results themselves. Let's talk about why this shift is happening now specifically, rather than 5 years ago or 5 years from now, because timing actually matters a lot here. Artificial intelligence models have only recently become good enough, fast enough, and cheap enough to run at the scale required to handle billions of search queries a day with reasonably reliable accuracy. Just a few years ago, the technology simply was not mature enough to replace traditional search for most people, no matter how much hype existed around it. That technical maturity, combined with a growing wave of public frustration around ad saturation, privacy concerns, and declining perceived search quality, created exactly the conditions needed for a genuine behavioral shift to actually take hold at scale, rather than staying a niche habit for a small group of early adopters. It is also worth mentioning that Google itself clearly sees this shift coming, which is exactly why the company made such a dramatic, all-in bet on AI at its most recent major product event, rather than trying to preserve the traditional search experience that made it dominant in the first place. That decision tells you something important. Google is not oblivious to the fact that user behavior is changing, and rather than fighting that shift, the company chose to lean directly into it, betting that most users will simply accept AI-generated answers as the new default, the same way they once accepted a page of ranked blue links as the obvious way to search the internet. Whether that bet pays off long-term for Google, specifically, is genuinely uncertain. But the underlying shift toward AI-mediated information discovery appears to be happening regardless of which specific company ends up capturing the most users. Now here is something I think about a lot, and it genuinely changes how I evaluate every new tool I try. Whether it is a search engine alternative or anything else, every one of these AI-native tools, no matter how good they feel today, still depends on the underlying quality of the web itself. If AI assistants increasingly answer questions directly, without sending traffic back to the original websites that created the information in the first place, what happens to the incentive for anyone to keep creating high-quality original content at all? This is not a hypothetical concern. It is already showing up in real traffic numbers across the industry, and it represents a genuine structural risk to the long-term health of the open internet that none of us should ignore just because the immediate user experience of switching feels better today. I do not have a clean, satisfying answer to that concern. And I want to be upfront about that instead of pretending I do. What I can tell you is that this tension between a genuinely better individual user experience and a potentially worse long-term ecosystem for the web as a whole is exactly the kind of trade-off worth thinking about seriously as more and more of us make the same switch away from traditional search. It is entirely possible to both enjoy the improved daily experience of AI native search tools and remain genuinely concerned about what widespread adoption of this technology means for the broader internet over the next 5 to 10 years. Those two things are not contradictory, they are just both true at the same time. And I think pretending otherwise does a disservice to how complicated this transition actually is. So let's get practical for a moment, because I know a lot of you watching this are wondering whether you should actually make a similar switch yourself. And I want to give you an honest, useful framework instead of just telling you to blindly copy what I did. If you regularly search for quick factual answers, product comparisons, or general knowledge questions, an AI native answer engine will probably feel like a genuine upgrade almost immediately, the same way it did for me. The speed and clarity of getting a direct, synthesized answer instead of a page of links to sift through yourself is honestly hard to go back from once you get used to it. If your work involves deep, specialized research, particularly in academic, legal, medical, or highly technical fields where source credibility and comprehensive coverage genuinely matter, I would recommend keeping traditional search available as a backup tool rather than abandoning it entirely. Because the sheer depth and breadth of what a mature search index has crawled over decades still offers real value that a newer AI tool cannot always fully replicate yet. This is not an all or nothing decision, and treating it that way would honestly be bad advice on my part. And if privacy is your primary concern rather than speed or convenience, specifically look for tools that are transparent about not building an advertising profile on you and not personalizing results based on a tracked search history, because not every alternative to Google actually solves the privacy problem. Some of them simply replace one form of data collection with another, dressed up in a slightly different marketing package. If this kind of honest, practical breakdown is useful to you, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because we are going to keep testing new tools as they come out and telling you honestly what actually works and what is just marketing hype dressed up as innovation. Let me leave you with the bigger picture here, because I think it matters more than any single tool recommendation I could give you in this video. The way we find information online is going through the most significant transformation, since search engines themselves first replaced physically browsing directories and bookmarked lists back in the earliest days of the internet. Google spent over 2 decades building an experience so dominant that typing a query into its search bar became a verb in its own right, something almost nobody questioned or thought to replace. That era is not necessarily ending overnight, but it is genuinely, measurably shifting. And I think most people simply have not stopped to notice how much their own daily habits have already started changing underneath them. I did not stop using Google search because of some grand ideological stance against the company, and I want to be clear about that. Because I think framing this as some kind of moral crusade would be dishonest and honestly a little dramatic. I stopped using it because day after day, other tools started genuinely serving me better, faster, and with more transparency about where information was actually coming from. That is really the only test that matters when you are deciding whether to change a habit you have had for over 2 decades. Not brand loyalty, not nostalgia, just whether the tool you are using is actually still the best one available for what you personally need it to do. I also want to be honest that this switch did not happen instantly for me either, and I do not think it needs to happen instantly for you if you decide to try it yourself. There were plenty of moments in that first week or two where I caught myself instinctively opening a browser tab and typing google.com out of pure muscle memory, only to stop halfway through and remind myself that I was specifically testing something new. Old habits built up over 20 years do not disappear overnight just because a genuinely better tool exists, and giving yourself permission to slip back into old patterns occasionally while you adjust is a much more realistic expectation than trying to force some perfect, immediate transformation. If you decide to try making this same switch yourself, my honest advice is to not go all in on day one. Keep Google available as a backup while you genuinely test alternatives against your real daily habits for a week or two. The same way I did, rather than reading a handful of comparison articles online and assuming you already know how it will feel in practice. Some tools will click with you immediately, others will not fit how you actually work at all, and the only real way to find out which is to actually use them for the specific tasks that fill up your average day, rather than just testing them once with a single trivial question. The internet is genuinely changing, and how we search for information is right at the center of that change. Whether you decide to stick with Google, switch entirely to an AI native alternative, or land somewhere in between using a mix of different tools depending on the task, the most important thing is that you're actually making that choice consciously, instead of just defaulting to whatever habit you built up over the last 20 years without ever stopping to question whether it is still genuinely serving you well. None of us know exactly how this story ends, whether Google successfully adapts and holds onto its dominant position by fully embracing AI, whether a genuinely new default emerges from one of these smaller challengers, or whether the whole landscape simply stays fragmented with different people, relying on different tools depending on their specific habits and priorities. What I do know is that the days of typing every single question automatically into one single search bar without ever pausing to consider a genuine alternative already feel, at least to me, like they are quietly becoming a thing of the past. If this video helped you think differently about how you search for information online, hit like, hit subscribe, and let me know down in the comments which search tools you have personally been testing lately, because I genuinely want to know if your experience matches mine, or if you have found something completely different that works even better. Since this entire space is moving fast enough that I guarantee the landscape will look at least a little different again by the time we revisit this topic in just a few more months. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next one.